Ensure the domestic tranquility. Let's play hardball. Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews in New York. Let me start tonight by talking about America. The preamble to our Constitution addresses two areas of security. One is to provide for the common defense against foreign enemies. The second is to ensure domestic tranquility against violence from within. It is impossible to imagine the Congress of the United States ignoring the first of these imperatives, an act of omission that would leave us deliberately open to foreign attack, even invasion. Tragically, we can't say the same about attacks on the country's domestic tranquility. What has the Congress done to protect this country from last week's all-out attack on an American school? Nothing. And here's the question. When will we refuse, as citizens, to settle for, accept, live with a Congress that fails to act in the face of such a demonstrated vulnerability? If not now, after this, when? Next week? Next month? Next year? Next what? And if not us, who in this world is going to demand action to protect Americans? Joining me now is U.S. Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois. I want to read something from you, which is very impressive, and it's in the op-ed pages of the Chicago Tribune. Quote, what holds us back are political organizations that are well-funded, well-organized, and determined to resist even reasonable limitations. There's a close political parallel between the gridlock in Washington on dealing with our economy and national debt and the eerie silence in Congress as the list of horrific gun crimes grows by the day. Senator Durbin, thank you. I know you've got a good heart on this as well as a good head about fiscal matters. What's wrong with the Congress when it comes to protecting, ensuring the domestic tranquility?
Well, there's a legitimate concern about our Second Amendment, Chris. You understand that part. But there's also a very strong political force that is trying to push forward, primarily for the dealers and manufacturers, an agenda that'll sell more firearms and more sophisticated firearms, more expensive firearms. And that has really dominated the scene. If you asked who is the head of the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms divisions of the Department of Justice, you'd have to learn, unfortunately, that for literally years there's not been a head. The NRA and gun lobby have successfully even stopped the basic organization in charge of enforcement of our gun laws in America.
You know, when the late Charlton Heston would run that ad for the NRA, he'd wave some old musket in the air and say, from my cold, dead hands, which I thought was pretty, well, awful to begin with. The cold, dead hands, the absolute nature of that demand that they hold on to the gun. But he never waved an AK-47 or an AK-15 in the air. He never showed a 30-round clip in the air with a big banana on it. He never did that because people don't think of that as really American Revolution era. They think about that as state-of-the-art mass killing.
Of course it is. And those are military weapons, military assault weapons. And, you know, thank goodness law enforcement turned up in Newtown when it did, or the list of children who had been killed and teachers would have been much, much longer. Think about what happened out in Aurora, Colorado. That man stood in front of a crowded theater spraying that audience with one of these assault weapons, and the only thing that stopped him emptying the 100 cartridges that he had to shoot was it jammed. If it hadn't jammed, the death toll would have been even higher.
Well, you know, it's not hopeless, though. You talked about the Second Amendment, but look, back in 1934, when we had Machine Gun Kelly and all the guys out in Chicago, we had the whole Prohibition era encouraging a certain kind of crime, rum running, etc. Here's the question. Back then, the Congress had the guts to outlaw automatic weapons, machine guns. Basically, they did. They were heavily regulated, almost to the point of you don't find them around. Here's the question. Why can't Congress do the same thing with semi-automatics? I know we've got millions of them and whatever. Can't we start to regulate? We don't have to regulate a shotgun or a regular pistol with a revolver or anything. But if you go into the semi-automatic level, why don't we say that's like the automatic level? Just go with that. The courts would have to approve it because they approved the earlier one, didn't they? Isn't there a precedent?
They did. And even after the Heller decision, the Supreme Court told us there were reasonable limits that Congress could impose when it came to firearms. There are two groups that I think are essential to the success of this effort.
Okay.
First, sportsmen and hunters. And let me tell you, Chris, I know plenty of them in my family and all around downstate Illinois. They're good people. They're good citizens. They hate what happened in Newtown, Connecticut as much as we do. We need them as part of this conversation. And the second group that has to step up is law enforcement.
Right.
There was a time time when they spoke out against these terrible weapons of death. We need them again to be part of this conversation.
Well, I would ask, why would anybody out there want the criminal to be heavier armed than the policeman? He's got a little 9mm job or a 38 police special, and somebody comes in with this assault rifle. But let's go back to the earlier, the sportsmen. Do you think the sportsmen you know and are organized in Illinois, for example, do you think they would support a limit on the size of the number of rounds in a clip?
I think they would. And you look at the polls of sportsmen and hunters, people who own guns for those purposes in self-defense, overwhelmingly, they're for reasonable limitations. You ask them point blank, should we have a background check to make sure that unstable individuals don't get their hands on a firearm? And they say, of course. Why would we want that to happen? There is a common ground here, but we need to hear their voices. Many are speaking for them in Washington who really don't understand their values.
Let me ask you about the comparison you drew, because I hope we're in the 11th hour of the fiscal crisis, fiscal cliff debates and negotiations. Tell me about that parallel between the unwillingness to deal with, you very courageously supported Simpson Bowles, and it seems like people on the left and right have a hard time making those kind of compromises. How's that similar to what we're dealing with the gun issue?
Come on, Chris, you worked around here. You know how this works. People go back to their home districts, and people in the gun lobbies will say, listen, we've got a scorecard here, and we're going to watch every single vote, and you better be right, buddy. You better score an A, or we're going to come and defeat you in the next election. Well, it's the same mentality that drove the Grover Norquist pledge. You pledge, I'll be there with an A no matter what. I can't tell you how many times I've looked at my colleagues in the eye after they cast one of these crazy votes on guns, and they just, shrug their shoulders and say, I live in a pretty conservative area. The honest answer is, even in conservative areas, people are sensible and rational. And if we come up with something that's reasonable, that doesn't inhibit basic sportsmen and hunters and self-defense, we're going to have strong support across party lines.
Governor Adlai Stevenson of Illinois once said, it's the duty of leaders to lead. Thank you very much, Dick Durbin. You're a leader. Thanks for joining us. Merry Christmas to you. With me now is Washington Post columnist Dana Milbank. Dana, thank you. You're a sarcastic fellow, and I enjoy that in you. But let's get to the heart of this thing. What's wrong with the Congress? Why can't it do anything? I want to read from your column today. If you believe the current national mood will be the same in the coming weeks, you got another thing coming. Are we in a mood of change, of demand, that at least at around the edges of gun control, action can be taken? Numbers of bullets, of rounds in a clip. Do we really want to have a kid, a crazy person, wandering around with a clip of 30 bullets in it? Especially bullets that have been worked on to make sure they explode as widely as possible inside the human body?
Yeah, Chris, I mean, this is one of those issues that defies any sarcasm or irony, and it does sort of just bring out anger. And I was writing today about, the president saying in the coming weeks. Now, that's perfectly sensible on the one hand, to say that he's going to take action in the coming weeks and to ask his cabinet to come up with proposals. We've got Christmas coming. We've got the fiscal cliff debate. But we've seen this movie before, and what happens is the NRA and its allies are back on their heels. Some action could be taken. Then they regain their balance. And by the time people get around to doing something like reinstating the assault weapons ban, the support is gone for it. And you see it happening again. The NRA is now saying they're going to have their rollout of whatever their announcement is going to be on Friday. You can be sure they're not going to say, let's reduce the magazine capacity to have an assault weapons ban.
Although they're going to do something on mental illness funding.
Of course.
They're going to hide from this gun issue so far you won't believe it.
Of course, and the Republicans who have been kind of quiet are going to rally around that point of view. Some of the pro-gun Democrats, we've had about a half dozen in the Senate, have come out and said, well, maybe we'll be open to something. They're going to be reined back in, too. So if you don't seize the initiative, if you don't take advantage of when the NRA is back on its heels, this isn't going to happen, and we're going to be dealing with the same thing in a few months.
Here's a smart senator talking now. Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, a moderate Democrat, most people would count him as, joined the chorus of pro-gun Democrats. He's one who are willing to look at changes in gun safety. Let's listen to the senator from Virginia.
I believe every American has Second Amendment rights, and that the ability to hunt is part of our culture. I've had an NRA rating of an A, but, enough is enough. I'm father of 3 daughters, and this weekend they all said, Dad, how can this go on? And I think most of us, realize that there are ways to get to rational gun control. There are ways to grapple with the obvious challenges of mental illness.
There's wonderful words in the Bible about you must become like a child. The interesting to approach the Lord, and I was thinking that In so many cases in recent history, you've seen the young in this country, the people under 30, for example, who have led the way on issues like same-sex marriage, on issues like even Obama's election to the presidency in so many cases. Do you think this is an area where young kids are going to say to their parents, get over this NRA fixation, be loyal to us kids, not to them?
I think that's exactly what we're hearing now, and that's why you heard Joe Manchin from West Virginia saying the same thing. You had Harry Reid, who's quite pro-gun, out there making some favorable noise. A lot of these incoming Democratic senators. The question is, how long can you sustain that action? We've seen in the polls.
I'm with you on that, brother. I know the problem of passion. The people on the far right on the NRA front never lose their passion. Right. They think about it every day of their lives. They go to bed at night. They put their heads on the pillow, afraid somebody's going to take that gun away from them. And normal people have other interests, like their spouses, like their lives, their children, and even their generalized politics isn't all driven by one issue.
Right. What we've seen is this Congress operates under crisis. It requires a crisis, a fiscal crisis, an international crisis to create any sort of an action that's going on. The only way you beat back a special interest group, you know, it's no coincidence that Grover Norquist of the tax pledge is also on the board of the NRA. The only way you beat back this is with focusing public attention like a laser. And I just have a feeling if we wait for Dianne Feinstein to introduce her assault weapons ban in January, we're all going to be talking about something else.
I think you're smart. Thank you, Dana Milback.
Thank you.
Speed could be important here. Coming up, President Obama and House Speaker John Boehner meet again at the White House, and the two sides are inching closer to a deal on the cliff. The hard part of both men will be selling the deal to their own people. Plus, the National Rifle Association, the aforementioned organization, has gone largely silent since the Newtown massacre. Are they laying low, hoping the country's outrage subsides? That's what they're up to. They're hibernating. They're in their bunker now. We'll see what they're up to when they come back later in the show. And new details from the 2012 election. We now know how the Obama campaign responded behind the scenes after the president bombed in that first debate. We've got the authors of Politico's new ebook on the campaign's final days. And let me finish with why no one on the right ever blames President Obama or any president for these shooting sprees, because they don't want them to do anything about them. And this is Hardball, the place for politics.